And
should
that's
be
not
done.
imposter syndrome. You are inept. So you are, and that's the thing, we need to stop confusing the terms. You don't have imposter syndrome. You are inept and inexperienced to meet the needs of the role. That's a whole different ball of wax, and I have had to let people go from jobs because I've hired people who have said to me, I have all of these skills. I've looked at the job description. I've had interviews and it looks like they know what they're doing. They get into the job and they're floundering. And at 90 days, I'm going to be like, this is not a good fit for you. You do not have the necessary skills to be able to do this role. And we should both just separate with the best of intentions, and you go on your merry way and we go on ours. So I think that's what people like to conflate. People who are actually inept and inexperienced and making that be imposter syndrome. It's not.
Hello, everybody. Hello, my name is Elena, and I am the professional development person over at ACERO. We are doing something different today. We have what's called an interview series and all things workplace. To start us off on our interview series, you have this fabulous, wonderful, intelligent, active woman that you see in front of your screen, which is Suzanne Morrison-Williams, and she's going to be talking about a topic that I know that you'll be interested in. It's called the myth of the imposter syndrome. So a few things to keep in mind before we get started is that I will have our information down in the description. If you want to have questions that you don't want to put into the comments box, you can put that as an email and it'll come to us. And I will ask Suzanne in a couple of weeks to come back if there's enough questions that she can follow up on. But feel free to put your questions down in the box, or like I said, if you didn't want to put in the box and you just want to email us directly, I'll have that information available as well. So not to waste too much time, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll get started with the questions.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hopefully that you will find this a wonderful session to be part of today. So my official name is Dr. Suzanne Morrison-Williams. I have a doctorate in organizational leadership, which I got all the way back in 2015. I currently serve as a chief academic officer at Library and Information Resources Network. I have spent over 20 years in the C-suite, and my side hustle is that I'm a women's empowerment and success coach. Author. I wrote a book called Boss Leadership, which came out during the pandemic, which is essentially about women's empowerment. So that is the background that I have that I'm bringing to you today as we discuss the myth of imposter syndrome.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we're going to get started a little bit about, because I think a lot of times we embrace the imposter syndrome as something like a badge, almost a badge of honor a little bit. So I know when I was having conversations with Suzanne and she was just like, that's a myth. I was like, okay, tell me a little bit more. So what we're going to start is Suzanne's going to give us a little bit of history about the imposter syndrome, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Now, I work for a library consortia, so one of the things that librarians do, I am not a librarian and I don't play one on TV, but one of the things that happens with librarians that we have data, right? So librarians always have a lot of data. So I have notes in front of me and I have notes to the side of me. So if you see me not looking directly at you, it is not because I do not care about my audience. It is because I'm actually making sure that I have accurate notes, and I'm reading from my notes. So let's begin with a little bit of history. So in 1978, some research was done by two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. The initial research on imposter syndrome was done on undergraduate women. So that's the first thing we have to understand, that this initial research was done on women who were in the process of getting educated. These weren't professional women. This was just a group of women who are coming into their own. So not only are they emotionally and psychologically underdeveloped, they're also educationally underdeveloped. So we understand. Years later, 10,000 professionals were queried, and men and women, about how men and women feel about being an imposter in the workplace. And it was done geographically now, across a wide cross-section of countries. And it was noticed that people feel differently based on the nation that they come from. We won't go into that particular research today. But the point that we need to take from this research is that the inference from the research has more to do with work pressure and less about gender. The research was really about work pressure, not gender. However, it began to be applied more to one gender, women, than to others. So originally, they studied high-achieving women who felt like frauds despite their success. So now we've taken the research from undergraduate women into high-achieving women. Now, what to me is interesting is describing what this high-achieving woman is. And I've never been able to get to the bottom of who are these high achieving women? Where did they come from? What was their background? But it talked about high achieving women who felt like frauds despite evidence of their success. And so once this research got into the zeitgeist, it quickly spread. And this is what we always have to remember, that sometimes something that is sexy, something where the title is racy, will take on a life of its own. And that's exactly what happened to this title. So it quickly spread through academia, business, and became a catch-all phrase for an explanation of women's lack of confidence or hesitation. Now, it's interesting, the two areas that it spread through, right? It didn't spread through science, and it didn't spread through manufacturing. Those are largely male-dominated industries, but it began to spread through academia, very, very, female-dominated industry, and business, because lots of women are in business. So it became the cultural narrative that if a woman doubted herself, then she was told to have imposter syndrome. Women did not create this term for themselves. Other people created the term and put it out there. And unfortunately, women decided to take ownership of this term. And so it became a part of our cultural identity to identify things in the workplace that were not suitable to our level of success.
Yeah, before you get to the next one, I could see that some people would say, but I do have doubts. I was voluntold to be in leadership and I don't feel comfortable. In that sense, it by providing that term, is that sort of, because I get a lot of people who are like, this is how I feel. Is it how they feel, or is there a terminology? What is it? Is it chicken or the egg? I guess is what I'm saying.
The question is, why do you have doubts? Why do you doubt? So that, so a lot of times we have the doubt, and rather than questioning the why behind it, we accept the doubt and then we move forward. So if it is that you have doubt, what is it that you have doubt about? Do you have doubts because you don't feel you have enough information to do the job effectively? You don't feel you have enough support to do the job effectively? You don't feel that the company, organization, or department is set up for your success? What is creating your doubt? That is what you address. What is creating the doubt? Not accepting that the doubt is a de facto empirical piece of data, because how we feel is never wrong. So if you feel that I have doubts about the situation, you have to own that. Yeah. So when women say, I have to own you, we have to own it. But what we also have to do to take one step further, why is it that I have doubt? And then begin to question that. So when I am working with my clients, that is what I always do. Years ago, when I was becoming a coach and I was asked, what's your coaching methodology? I froze. I froze because I'd never asked myself that question. I was just going about the business of being a coach. And as I froze, I could have taken that to mean, oh my God, I'm an imposter syndrome. I have imposter syndrome. I don't know what I'm doing. When the question was asked of me, I thought to myself, I need to provide an answer to that. So I went home and I thought for 24 hours and I came back and I said, I have a three-pronged approach to my coaching. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? Is your current course of action taking you there? Three-pronged approach. So it's not that women should not, not that women are not going to have doubts. It's not that men are not going to have doubts, but you need to question where the doubt is coming from and the basis of that doubt, and then answer the question, not just accept somebody else's statement about you because they don't know you. And so them making a statement or an assumption about you that is not accurate is often what leads to issues.
So you're saying sort of, especially if you're already with doubts and the organization or the culture that you have is not really affirming you at all, it could even add into more doubts. Is that kind of where you're leaning?
Exactly. So, and quite frankly, that's the reason why imposter syndrome has taken on a life of its own, because organizations are not built to support women in positions of supervision, management, or leadership. No, the science and the research says that we are extremely effective in those roles because society has molded us to be to be better and more effective in those roles. Because those roles all require people who with empathy, people who are good listeners, people who are effective communicators, people who are able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, people who are not trigger happy, who think before they act. These are all traits that are culturally bred in women. From the time that you're a young girl, these are traits that people are constantly building in you and reinforcing in you. So we walk into supervisory management and leadership roles with some inherent skills. Of course, you have to work on those, right? Because depending on the environment, but we walk in with those skills. But the organizations are often not built to support us. Organizations are built often to take direction from the top down, and which is a very quote unquote masculine way to do things, right? I'm going to give a set of orders and directives, and everybody needs to do them. Women are collaborative. So women are going to ask for your opinion, your feedback, and then we are going to, in an effort to be collaborative and inclusive, make sure everybody is seen and feels heard. And then we take action from that. If it is that we have to do something harsh, we're going to soften the blow. We're going to explain the rationale behind why things are happening. We're going to try to build coalitions of support. The organizations are not built that way. Now, what is interesting to me is organizations that are built that way are called learning organizations, right? And a lot of times the people leading these charges in organizations happen to be women because it's an inherent quality, an inherent trait. And please, gentlemen who are listening to me, this is not a man bashing session. This is not what we're doing here. We are just trying to dispel some of the myths that we see happening. Some of the greatest champions I see in companies and organizations trying to promote women are men, because men do understand inherent skills and qualities that women bring in. But when you have this term that's being thrown around out there, and it's applied only to one gender and not the other, when both genders are feeling exactly the same thing, is why we're addressing this. Men have as much doubt in their jobs as women. Men have as much fear in jobs as women, yet men are not told that they have imposter syndrome.
No, it just brought me to two things that had happened to me in my life. One is this larger than life director I used to work for, and she was like, but she was larger than life, and everybody was scared of her. I mean, she indirectly, I don't think she meant to run through fear, right? And everybody was afraid of her. And it was sort of that was her badge, right? And I remember one day, because I knew she liked me. And she had brought me in the office because I had gotten another job offer, and she wanted to kind of persuade me to stay. But it came across so hostile and mean. I remember in the middle of it, it dawned on me. I said, "You know what? Actually, you're shy." I said, "You're shy." Literally, I said, "You are shy." And her whole demeanor changed, like we were doing like some undercover secret. And she's like, "I am shy." And she's like, "How do you know?" I said, "'Cause I know you like me, but the way you're going about this is so weird." I said, "You're almost covering up for your shyness." And somebody who everybody was terrified of, she was like, "I am." And she's like, "I don't think being a leader leaves any room for shyness," which I thought was really sad, because I think that we should be able to lean in our strengths and be comfortable that we're not perfect, and so there's things that we're not gonna be 100% good at, and I think that should be okay. But it was really weird that it was this persona that was sort of hiding her sort of who she was truly. Yeah.
My mom was a vice president of HR, so I grew up watching a woman in a position. My mom was a HR director, my dad was a CEO, so I grew up watching these two people, both in positions of leadership, and I watched how they both executed the leadership very differently. No, my dad executed the leadership in a very typical male fashion. I am the boss, I'm in charge, I'm going to give directives, and you're going to do what you need to do. Yet it was funny, at home, he referred to my mother as management and me as administration, and that his job was just to, follow rules, that the rules that my mom set. And it was that difference that I began thinking about as a very young girl. Didn't realize how much of an impression that made on me, that my dad was one person at work and a different person at home. And that running his house, he could run his house the same way he ran his business. And I think women embrace it differently. We understand that the same skills you need to run your house is the same skills you need to run a business. It's exactly the same, because you need to have harmony, and you need to have cohesion. And so what I think you saw with your former supervisor is that in the 80s and 90s, women were required to take on very masculine traits in order for them to function effectively. And it was because we were breaking the glass ceiling, right? We were getting more and more into positions of leadership. And more of us realized that in order to compete, we had to behave in a way that the man who was going to hire us, because he saw us as one of the boys. So we took on that mantle. However, we'll talk a little bit later on when we talk about some numbers in terms of the numbers that we are in the workplace. Why it is that we are slowly but surely shifting how workplaces operate. I would like to think that workplaces are now less toxic because there are more women who are removing the toxicity from the workplace. And workplaces were toxic not because men were running them, but because the culture that had been bred was not one that was inclusive or collaborative. And more, with everything that you see, all the various terms that nobody likes us using anymore that still exist in the workplace, those things are helping to shift what we see in the workplace and helping to make changes. And I'm hoping that women understanding that at embracing a term that has nothing to do with your skill set is also part of moving that narrative forward.
No, no, I know, I think that's definitely true, and it would be curious to see if there's less toxicity with women in charge, because I do think sometimes it is when I talk to women in charge, they are it's still a need to embrace more masculine traits, right? And be tough, and not in sort of the vulnerability, sort of softness is sort of looked at as weakness. And I kind of agree with you that that needs to change, right? In order to sort of work and change the culture in
Yeah,
general.
it's interesting because a man who is self-confident is seen as it, it's a good thing. But if a woman is self-confident, she's arrogant. It is the way how culture has baked in how women should behave, still exists. And that I believe is part of what plays into the belief that women have imposter syndrome. It's because they're straddling two worlds. They're straddling the world of, I do not want to give up my femininity, which we shouldn't, right? But I also have to do this thing, and I understand how doing this thing is going to be perceived. It is interesting how you look at some women, and if they're going to have to make a really tough decision, Madeleine Albright is a perfect example, right? Madeleine Albright specifically always she wore suits, but they were very brightly colored, and she wore brooches and heels, and her hair was always done because Madeleine Albright's job was to make hard decisions and choices. But she did it with every ounce of femininity that she could, you know? Hillary Clinton tried to do that until they started taking pictures under her skirt, and so she just went to wearing pantsuits. It is interesting how culture forces women into making decisions because the system is not set up to be effective for us. So I'm gonna branch off, and I'm going to actually give the definition of imposter syndrome. So as we continue, so the classic definition of imposter syndrome is the persistent, not the fleeting, the persistent feeling of self-doubt, fraudulence, or fear of being found out despite objective success. So these are women who haven't just landed in the job. These are the women who have been in the job. I've been doing this job for a year. I'm successful in this role. I know I'm doing well. I'm hitting it out the park. I'm making my metrics. I'm doing my numbers. Yet I still feel that I shouldn't be here. I got here by accident, And one of the questions that whenever I'm talking about this to women and I say, and when I give this definition, I said, who feels like this? And a couple of women put up their hands, and I always say to them, how many of you have trained your boss? They go, what? I said, how many of you, there's been an opening in the company, and you looked at the job description, and the job description had 10 points. You only met 6 of those points, so you didn't apply for the job. And they go, all of us. And they go, but the man who got hired for the job, who you had to only met 4. And they go, yeah. And I said, and you ended up training your boss, who's making twice as much money. I said, how is that smart? And they go, it isn't. I said, exactly. I said, so you would have taken that job with the 6 skills that you have, knowing full well, I have to learn these other 4. And you would have learned the other 4. However, if you have learned the other 4 and you still have a persistent feeling of not doing well, despite everything that the metrics are telling you, that's something that you now need to question. Why is it I'm feeling this way? Is it that I'm not being recognized for what I'm doing? And a lot of times that happens. You are doing the work, you're making the metrics, but nobody's giving you a trophy. Nobody's giving you an award. Nobody's sending you the kudos email. Nobody's saying, "Atta girl." Nobody's, you are not the name that's at the top when they're having the big luncheons. You're not there. You're not getting invited to golf. None of those things are happening for you, despite the fact that you're doing well. So you are looking across the spectrum and you're seeing, well, the men are getting all of this stuff and I'm not getting it. What am I doing wrong? And you're not doing anything wrong. You're just in a system that wasn't set up to reward you the way that you want to be rewarded. And a lot of us who have been in those spaces have to learn how to recognize our own success and thank ourselves. I've done, one of the tools I tell women to use is a vision board, but a vision board that's like a cork board or one that's magnetic. So you put the goals that you have on there, and as you achieve them, you start moving them to the other side. So at the end of a quarter, you can look at that board and go, I hit all those markers. And yeah, he didn't tell me that I hit all those markers, but I hit all of those markers. And then what I train women to do is flip the script. Walk into the meeting with your boss and go, hey, these are my MBOs. I have 5 that I had a year to meet. I've met my MBOs in 6 months. So I'd like that noted. No, and I don't plan to add anymore because I seem to be the only one that's achieved mine. So I'm going to sail for the rest of the year because I've already achieved mine. You have to take ownership and take the wheel yourself, and you have to be your biggest champion. Women are constantly waiting for somebody else to tell them that they've done a good job. We need to stop that. We need to recognize when we've done a good job and reward ourselves. I have a lot of shoes and a lot of cologne for when I've done a good job. I'm going to go out and buy myself something to reward myself for what I've done, for the good work that I've done. And it's really important also for women to get over this by documenting the things that they do well and then talking to their supervisor about the things that they've done well so that the supervisor is very aware. And this is what changes the narrative. Men are very good at bragging. Very good at bragging. Women are told, there's a whole meme, right, on the internet about, how to be demure and all of that. No, we don't. No, we don't. We don't need to be demure. We need to be very clear to everyone. This is what I've done. This is what I've achieved. This is what I'm worth. And this is what I think I should have.
No, I mean, that's 100%. I remember when I was a director and people always were shocked when I decided to leave the job. But when I left the job, I got a new male boss, and I never will forget that I was in front of a stage with 300 people. We were successful, but I was never going to get the at a girl things. It just wasn't going to happen. However, I didn't really think of it because we have been doing our programs like clockwork. We were getting standing ovations. It wasn't anything that we thought anything of. And I remember sitting with my male boss, and he told me that I was getting enough attention and that I needed to introduce him and allow him to shine, and that I needed to fade. And he used the word fade into the background. And if I fade it into the background, then maybe my evaluation will be better. So I'm like, oh, you want me to dim my light so you can feel better? And he starts shaking his head like he didn't really connect to that. I'm like, you want me to get smaller so you can feel bigger? And I'm going to not be rewarded for shining my own light. I'm going to be rewarded for dimming my light. And then that's when I knew it was time to start looking.
So many people, particularly leaders, many people who appoint themselves as leaders are often inherently insecure individuals, and they take on the role of leader in order for them to feel bigger. True leaders are champions of others. True leaders are looking to make other people shine, and they put other people on the forefront, and you never know. There are lots of large organizations that you never know who the leaders in this organization are because they believe that they need to manage from the bottom up, and the people who do the work are the people who need to be championed. And I remember when I first began studying leadership and understanding what leadership was, and I made the decision that my leadership was going to be servant leadership, that my job is to provide you with the information, resources, and structure to do your job effectively. My job is to remove roadblocks out your way so that you can do what you need to do. So essentially, I felt that my job was to just be a steadying force with my hands behind you, constantly moving you forward. That is the role I take. That's the role I chose. I have made a significant number of men and women into leaders. And I remember the first time I was mentoring somebody into leadership. Interestingly, it was a librarian before I worked in the library world. But she had left the world of the library and she'd come into academia, and she really wanted to do well. And so over the course of a couple of years, she now is a chief academic officer at another institution. So she has really coming to her own, but I used to refer to her as my mini-me. And people were like, really? I said, yes. I said, my job is to make her a full replacement of myself. And whenever I was hiring, because I worked in higher education, whenever I was hiring a dean, a vice president, a campus director, or any of those roles, my words to them were, I'm always hiring to replace myself. And they were in shock. They said, well, what happens if we come and take your job? I said, if you are good enough to take my job, then I deserve to lose it. If I no longer am serving in a role that is going to move the organization forward or be beneficial to the organization, then it is time for me to step down. And so I am always training to replace myself. And what I didn't realize at the time, as I was doing this, was that I was building a solid coalition of support. I can call any one of I have not worked in the field of higher education. I left my last higher education job in 2023. Yet I can call anybody from any of the 5 institutions I've ever worked with and say, hey, can you? And they'll always say yes. And it is because of how I chose to lead. And it is also because I always say, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay, to be wrong. Let's just work on moving forward. And they go, but if it's a mistake, it's going to be a big deal. And I always remind them, I said, when Steve Jobs first debuted the iPhone, please go and look at the video. It was an abysmal failure. And he went back to the drawing board and he made changes. And then he implemented the most ubiquitous tool on the planet, iPhone, whatever. That's what he did. Then I remind them, said, neuroscience says we learn more from failure than we do success. When you fail at something, your brain literally has to rewire itself to find the multiple roads it needs to take to get to success. That is a biological scientific fact. We learn more from failure than we do success, because if you do something and it works, that's the one pathway your brain has formed. If you fail, your brain goes, this didn't work. Let me try this and this and this, and your brain immediately begins to form pathways. So that's what you have to do in order for you to kind of move forward. And to me, when I look at women, most of the women I work with are really good about embracing that. They're really good about, okay, this didn't work, let me figure it out. They don't come to a roadblock and throw their hands up, like Chicken Little and go, the sky is falling. They go, let's get back to grassroots and let's work through this. And so all the things that I'm saying to you are things that I have told women, when they've come to me with this foolishness about, I have imposter syndrome. No, you have a block. We need to figure out what's going on and we need to work past it and work through it. So let's, you had alluded to this earlier, but I have some research and I kind of want to share it with you about why imposter syndrome has largely been assigned to women. But I'm going to give some data first, right? Some data about where women were and where we are. And then we're going to talk about why it is that this has been assigned to women. So in 2023, women made up 47% of the U.S. civilian workforce. That's up from 30% in 1950. I didn't even realize in 1950 that many women were in the workforce. So the workforce is now 47%, and the population has doubled from 1950 to now, right? So think about the number of women in the workforce. Globally, more women have enrolled in higher education in the last 40 years. In 2020, 40% of women globally were enrolled. In the U.S., female enrollment grew from 23.1% in 2001 to 36.7% in 2021. That information comes from Statista. I know we have a lot of librarians who are listening, so you can go to Statista and get those records. But think about that. That's the number of women that we have, right? According to the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, women in the civilian labor force with a bachelor's degree or higher has risen from 26.9% in 1995 to 41.6% in 2016. So we are almost doubling where we were to where we are. It's what we know. Women are educated. There's a lot of educated women out there. So why are all these educated women doubting themselves? That seems to be counterintuitive. The more education you get is the more comfortable you feel. I remember when I was in college, I used to watch Jeopardy. And my thing from the time I was a freshman to the time I was a senior was I could answer more Jeopardy questions because I'd learned more. I had more information. So the more information you have is the more comfortable you should feel. So if you are having all of these degrees and you are still having this persistent feeling of self-doubt, why? What is happening with, where is the synaptic misfire? What is not happening that those two things aren't connecting? So then let's talk about leadership. 30.6% of leadership roles are held by women. And in the U.S., that's even larger. It's 33. So we who in the U.S. who like to complain about everything, we need to understand that we are leading the charge. As a woman who's, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I'm from Jamaica. I'm from a country that has already elected a woman to the highest position in the land. Jamaica's already had a female prime minister. So I came from a background where I saw women in leadership. So a lot of the Caribbean, even though they like to think they're patriarchal, very matriarchal. So I came from a background where I understood that women had inherent power and could do well in leadership. And when I came to college, my one thing was I needed to see my name on a door. I wanted a business card and I wanted my name on a door. So I think I was already predisposed to not buying into the myth of imposter syndrome. So when I began hearing it, and when I was writing my book, they told me to talk about it. I did. It's in the book. At no point do I talk about me experiencing it. Here's what it is, and here's how you combat it. So what is some other? Okay, so now let's talk about why it is that we are now seeing this term imposter syndrome ascribed to women. So we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, right? We talked about historically women are excluded from power structures. So I just talked about the fact that a number of countries have had female leaders. We're seeing that more and more, right? We're seeing more and more countries have female leaders, but largely women are excluded from positions of power and in power structures. So if it is that you are excluded, then you immediately think, I shouldn't be here when you get there. I know what it is like to sit in a room and look around the room. I'm the only one that looks like me. Two ways. I'm the only female, I'm the only Black person, I'm the only Black female. So if you are not inherently confident in who you are and your skill, you're going to look around that room and immediately think that you shouldn't be there. And so the term imposter syndrome, while it is applied to women, it is applied to BIPOC women with even greater alacrity, is the only word I can find, because people certainly like to spread that term around. And it is because there is the assumption that you shouldn't be there. How did you get here? How did you sneak by? Because we had guardrails put up. We had a lot of guardrails put up and you snuck by. And that's what women have done. So, it's interesting to me watching the workplace change now, because the workplace, the corporate structure said you need to have a degree, you need to be certified, you need to have this many years of education, you need to do all of these things. And women quietly did those things. So they quietly just did what they needed to do, applied for the jobs, were the best person for the job and got the job, and then sat in the seat. But then they sat in the seat and looked around them and went, whoa, this isn't built to support me in any way, shape, or form. So should I really be here? Did I work too hard and, shoot past my goal and shot into a place that I shouldn't be? Maybe I should have spent a little bit longer being an assistant vice president before I went for the vice president role. Or maybe I should have been a vice president before I shot to the C-suite. Am I really where I'm supposed to be? So now you begin to question yourself, because the structure that you are in is not built to support you. About the fact that we're also supposed to be humble and, demure and self-effacing. We're to do all of those things. And it is very hard if you are the person in the room. Let's have a scenario. There are 5 managers, right? 5 managers, each of you managing different districts. Everybody's district is struggling. Everybody's district. But you have figured out how to get your district to not struggle, but to know support, but to know be doing well. You're meeting all your metrics. So you're meeting all of your metrics. And you go into the meeting and everybody's talking about how difficult it is. And then they turn to you and they don't ask you, what are you doing that's working, that you're meeting your metrics? They immediately say, well, we want to know what the heck you're doing, because if we can't get to it, how are you getting to it? What are you doing that is essentially accusing you of doing something that you shouldn't be doing in order for you to make the metrics that you're making? That is what we mean by the structures are not built for our success as women, because it is never about she has been able to do it, and so we need to look at her model and follow it. She's clearly cheating or gaming the system, and we need to pull her down to our level so that we're all equal. So of course, if you're in a structure like that, you do think, I shouldn't be here. This is not built for me.
No, that's very true. I mean, when I first started as a director, I had no sort of people management experience. I had project management experience. I didn't have any people management experience. And I went from just sort of having one facility to manage. When I walked in, it was a recession. So they were like, oh, by the way, you're going to have like 5 or 6 other places. And I'm like, I don't know. And I don't know. But I always tell people I was so blessed that I had a woman as my boss. And she was seasoned. She had been around for a long time. And I remember when I went to her, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. This wasn't, I'm already geared up for one scenario. And then here's this other scenario that just landed on my lap. And I never forget the advice she gave me. And I was always eager to learn. I didn't feel like I didn't belong there, but I felt like I needed to figure out the tools because this wasn't really what I thought. And she said, "Stop it. It's easy. It's easy. You can do it." She's like, "What I need for you to do is number one, I need you to go visit the other locations that you're now supervising." And she says, "I need you to learn about the locations, but I don't need you to do their work, but I need you to understand the differences of those locations." She says, "I want you to let them know that my job is just to remove barriers from your life to make your work run smoothly, and that we will argue about things. I will not agree with everything that you're doing, but I will always form a united front. I will fight for you to the death because you're my region." And I've followed all of that to the T. I just said, "Oh, okay, I'll do exactly what she just told me to do." Then a year later, one of my managers said, "You were the best manager I've ever always had." And I teared up a little bit because it wasn't, my boss kept saying, "It's easy, don't worry about it." And her confidence, "It's easy, don't worry about it. Just do these things, you'll be fine." And to hear the validation from my manager that says, "You are hands down the best manager in 35 years that I've ever dealt with." And I remember my manager smiled at me and winked at me like, "See, I told you it was easy." But I just keep thinking, like, what if I would have had that crazy male boss instead of that female boss, right? Who was affirming that you have within you to be a great leader. Whereas he was like, "Dim your light, make me look good," right? And so I always felt like the same advice that my boss gave is what I gave my managers. I just, you know, pushed it forward. And my region always felt confident. And people were like, "Why did you guys feel so confident?" I said, "Because it started from the top and it went to me and then I went to my managers." And I just think about what you're saying about affirming, the thing of affirming that you belong here. You're fine. It'll work out. Just these easy steps. You're good. And just what a difference that made. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought up gender because I do want to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and this whole gender piece. So we talked about women are historically included from power structures, right? We talked about the fact that we're socially conditioned to be humble, likable, deferential. That word, deferential, we will defer to somebody else's authority. And in gender stereotypes, confidence is aligned to arrogance in women, not men. Now, the thing that we also have to think about why it is that imposter syndrome has taken on this big role in the zeitgeist is because it's called a syndrome. That's a medical term. So what we've done is told women something's wrong with you. You have a disease and an illness that needs to be dealt with. Think about what that does. When not only you tell somebody that you have a syndrome and then you accept that you have a syndrome, syndromes last a long time. Syndromes aren't passing things, right? Syndromes last. So now we are assuming that this thing is an inherent thing that's wrong with women, and we never ever ascribe that to men. Men are expected to be confident. And so if they have a syndrome, then this is going to undermine their masculinity. So there is an agreement that we don't do this to men. We don't give men syndromes. We can give it to women, but we don't give it to men. If a man is struggling, in a role, it is viewed as stress and anxiety about the performance, never ineptitude. He's not looked as being inept. He's just struggling. We need to help him a little bit. And usually somebody else has to help him. With women, you are inept. So the term syndrome has been created and disseminated to undermine women's function and effectiveness in their role. And it is a reason why I will continue to say it is a myth. We do not need to embrace anything that we didn't create. We didn't create it. We created the term boss lady. We will embrace those terms. We do not embrace anything that somebody else has put on us, be they male or female. So we need to make sure that whatever terminology that we take on, we make sure that it's terminology that we want to accept. I once had and I think I wrote down the terms here. I once had was it a staff member? I can't remember now, but I remember I had these notes written somewhere and they said, well, if it's not imposter syndrome, well, how would we frame it? Particularly if we wanted to be gender inclusive to the term. And so we use the term workplace exclusion because sometimes men are excluded from certain parts of the workforce, right? For whatever reason. All of us have worked with people who are not particularly, who are inept in certain things. And so when we're executing certain things, we're like, don't ask John to come. John going to create too much. We have to give John 3 explanations. We don't have time for that, right? The other thing, which nobody likes to talk about, is bias and discrimination, because those are very real things. And when I explained to people, I said, all of us are biased and all of us discriminate and all of us have stereotypes that we work within. It is inherent in a person. All of us have them. Our job and our role in life is to try to work, to address them, to see them head on, and then to work, around them. My doctoral work was in mentorship, and specifically, the role of the mentor-protege relationship as it pertained to leadership attainment of the Black/African-American female, which, was my thesis. And one of the things that I discovered as I was doing my dissertation was that Black women will not mentor women who they do not see who have the potential for success. So we look for a similar other to mentor, because this whole thing that we're talking about, we have had to work really hard to get to the position that we're in. We will not mentor another woman who we do not think has the same capabilities as us. Men will. Women won't. BIPOC women further won't, because they're like, I can't drag you. You need to come equipped. It's all about. So that when I discovered that, because I defended my dissertation in 2015, so I'm now 10 years, right, post dissertation. But when I was writing that chapter, was about a year or two before, I read that and it made an impact on me, because I realized that is an inherent bias that I have. How do I work through that bias? And as I think to where I am today, my bias of not wanting to mentor women who I don't think have a certain level of capability will create an atmosphere of, you don't think you deserve here because I'm not showing you that you deserve to be here. So even as women, we do have to be aware of the fact that we too can foster an environment where another woman feels excluded, and she will then think, I can't do my job because she doesn't honor me and she doesn't recognize me and she doesn't do all of those things. So when I say it's the myth of imposter syndrome, it is, but women can create an atmosphere in an environment where other women do not feel comfortable and cannot excel. And so as women, we also need to be aware of that. The other thing that we also should look at in terms of a naming nomenclature is lack of recognition and inequity in recognition, which we talked about before, right? So you talked about your very first boss who didn't want you to be recognized at all. You need to be a nice little wallflower and stay in your corner, and you need to shine the spotlight on me and make sure that I look great. So it doesn't matter how good, in all likelihood, you are creating the foundation for him to stand on. He doesn't care about the foundation. He only cares about the fact that he gets to stand on the foundation you created. That therein lies the problem, right? So we have a lack of recognition and inequity of recognition. Then we also talked about what I talked about, the perceived standards. The amount of times I have had to tell women, apply for the job. No, I can't apply for the job. Apply for the job. If you don't apply for the job, a man's going to apply for the job and he's going to get the job. Apply for the job. And women have a need to be perfect. Somebody told us as little girls that we need to be perfect, particularly if we're going to compete with men. If we're going to compete with men, not only must we be perfect, but we must be better than they are. Men do not operate on this premise. They do not. Men operate on the premise that I know I have confidence. I can do this job. It may take me a year to learn all the things, but I'm going to go in there, I'm going to give it my best shot, and we're going to work it out. We're going to work it out. We come in thinking I must answer all questions. And it's interesting, sometimes when we're interviewed, people expect us to answer all questions, right? They'll ask us an interview and, well, we have these, and these problems. How would you solve them? I don't know. I don't work in your organization, so I can't tell you how to solve all of these problems. But we get asked these questions. I want to look at them. I'm like, the last time I checked, I did not rise on the third day and I don't walk on water. So I don't know how you expect me to answer that question. I can give you some ideas of what I think could work, but it's interesting. The questions you get asked in an interview, you're like,
I know I was laughing when you said that because I just had an interview, a job interview, where somebody was asked me to think about applying for something. And that was what they were asking me. And they got really mad. I mean, visibly upset in their face when I was like, I have no idea. And I mean, and honestly, because they were like, here's our problems that I don't even know what their problems are because I don't have all the information. What would you do when you first day, when you walk in the door? How can you fix everything? I'm like,
well, the first day I need to know where the bathroom is. I need to clean my desk and sit down. I need all of my passwords to log in. That's what I'm doing the first day. I'm not solving any problems in your organization in day one. That much I can tell you. It's really interesting. But yeah, it is, and one of the things, I have a young woman that I'm coaching right now, and she's in her mid-30s, and she is doing the classic thing all women do. She's pulling out every stop and throwing it. And I said, stop doing all of that. And she's like, why? I said, because if you think that those people are not taking every bit of your work and your ideas and using it for their benefit, and you're not getting paid for it, I said, stop it right now. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, you operate at a level 15. You need to start operating at a level 9. Scale it back.
Exactly.
Scale it way back. I said, because you show me what everybody else is doing. Everybody's operating at a clear 7. At 9, you are doing great, and you're not driving up your blood pressure and giving yourself a headache. Everybody's like, you need to come to work and give 100%. So what's going to be left for me after I give you 100%? We don't do that. We come to work and we have a set of tasks and some objectives and some goals that we need to meet. And we're going to do everything in our power to get to those tasks, goals, and objectives. And, we're going to do that. But, the interesting thing that you brought up about, your interview and them asking you to solve the problems and everything else is a lot of times women get asked to solve the problems, right? And they say, well, I would do this, this, and this. And they're working in the organization, they're working in the system, and they know this is really what's going to solve the problem. So they say, everybody tells them that they're in the public forum, everybody tells them that they're crazy, that they're nuts, and, you don't know what you're doing. And they don't feel, they feel away because they've been kind of publicly shamed into thinking that, what they're saying doesn't matter. 6 months later, the very thought that they put forward is put into effect. And the person who stole the idea is getting the reward for it. All of us have seen that in organizations. Every single one of us have seen this. What that does to the woman in the organization who put this idea forward is she feels underrepresented, underrecognized, and feels that nobody cares about what I bring to the table. So what does this make her feel? She now begins to feel, I shouldn't be here. And this is the second time it's happened to me. So I shouldn't be here. And it is not that she's a fraud because they're doing what she suggested, but because she had no recognition for the work, the work value that she brought to the organization, she feels undervalued. And that manifests itself in imposter syndrome because she begins to say, did I not word it? Maybe she knows she said it, but she begins to question herself. Did I not word it correct? Was my timing off? Was there a part that they're putting in that I didn't get? Did I tell it to the wrong person? That's the question that begins to happen. And that's the feeling that she's beginning to get. Not understand, you did nothing wrong. You did everything right. You just did it in the wrong place, the wrong time, and to the wrong people. And so this persistent feeling of being a fraud and not being good enough begins to manifest itself in her for no reason other than the organization that she works in. And the people that are in the organization are not the kinds of people that would allow her to become the best version of herself in that organization.
So just another frame of what advice, because I still do know plenty of men, regardless of what you're saying, they have a great deal of anxiety. I was doing a workshop last year. I think I was telling you about that. We were laughing, well, not laughing, but it was really sad to see how many people, when I asked them how were they coping and they were on medication, they were dealing with severe anxiety, fear that somebody's going to discover that they should not be there. So what advice, what steps would you tell people who I get what you're saying, but I'm still, still riddled with intense anxiety about being in a leadership position?
You have to start with you have to start self-belief. That is it. There is no magic pill you can take. There is no course you can take. You have to start by believing in yourself, which means you have to change your self-talk because people often talk themselves into anxiety because your self-talk and your self-doubt is what leads you into that place. People say belief kills and belief cures. Whatever the mind can perceive, you can achieve. All of those are sayings for a reason. It is because the most powerful thing that you have in your body is your brain and your ability to use your brain to create the life that you want. And it starts with you. It doesn't start outside of you. It has to start with you. What you can do is, I would tell people, start with daily affirmations. Really start with affirmations. and start with affirmations that speak life and that speak power into you. Write them on a post-it note, put them on your laptop, put them on when you get up in the morning and you're washing your face, make sure it's on the mirror. You have to change your frame of reference. When I was getting divorced, I looked around my house and all I saw was pictures of a life that no longer existed. It was pictures of me with my ex-husband and my son that didn't exist. And I remember having a conversation with my son, and I said, I'm going to have to change what's here. And I said, because this is not good for my emotional well-being. And my son and I went on an excursion. You and I live in South Florida, so you would understand. I started at Commercial Boulevard, and I hit every Ross, every Marshalls, every TJ Maxx, and every Home Goods, from Commercial Boulevard all the way up to Boca Raton. Every single one. There's a lot of them. Looking for inspirational artwork for my home. I took down 90% of the family photos and put up all inspirational things around my house. Now, this was in 2020, so this was mid-pandemic. So think about it. This is during the pandemic. You can't go anywhere. We're under lockdown. We're already under immense stress, thinking, am I going to wake up the following day because this disease has crippled the world? But I got up every morning to a plethora inspirational sayings, and it changed my framework because I understood we're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm getting divorced and I have a teenage son I have to raise. I don't have time to sit and wallow in self-doubt. I have to be the best version of myself to carry myself forward. And it was a lot of that is also what helped to fuel me to change, to move from being a leadership coach to being a success coach. Because being a success coach means not only can I lead you into supervision, management, and leadership, but I can lead you into other areas as well. And so I did daily affirmations of people who are struggling with perceived imposter syndrome. Say things that I am navigating systemic barriers. Stop using the words. And here's what people don't understand. The more you say the words is the more impact they have in your life. So if you keep saying, I'm getting over imposter syndrome, you've said the words are now there. So I am navigating systemic barriers. I am creating spaces where my abilities and skills are seen, appreciated, and recognized. You are changing the framework of how your brain is wired. What you're saying is, I am taking the power. I am going to do what it is that I need to do. And quite frankly, many of us have worked in toxic work environments where we have created our own little bubble in that toxic work environment. And the toxicity exists outside, and we're comfortable in our bubble because that is what we have chosen. I am autonomous, and my skills, abilities are necessary to the success of this enterprise. So you take ownership of it and you look at what is it that I am doing that's going to get me to where I need to get to. Again, I talked about some of the other things as well. When you feel that you're in that space, what are the things that I have accomplished in this role? Write them down. Write them down and put them where you can see them, where you're constantly looking at what your accomplishments are. If you are struggling because you think it's your personality that's creating the barriers for you, what are the good things about your personality? I am kind. I am generous. I am smart. I understand all facets of my job. I am collaborative. What are the things that you know inherently are good about yourself, and continue to reinforce them? Eventually, your voice needs to crowd out the doubt that is there. Ever seen somebody who's coming to themselves? It's one of the most beautiful things to ever witness, right? When you watch this kind of shy, introverted, wallflower suddenly come into their own and go, particularly in a meeting where somebody's trying to shout them down, and they pause and they go, I was speaking. I was not finished. When I'm through making my point, you can make yours, and then we can have a discussion. I, as a leader, want to just kick up my heels and just wiggle and be all happy in my seat, because you are watching some take responsibility and ownership and be autonomous. And those things, women who are like that do not have space for imposter syndrome, because what they understand is, I may not know this thing, but give me 3 months, I'll master it and I'll be fine. And so the more that women do that, look at the job description and go, I can do this, 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 and this. Okay, these 3 things, yeah, I'm going to work on that. And then as you're going to work on that, you pick up the phone and go, hey, I realize that I need to know about how to use this system. I don't know how to use this system. Can I meet with you next week and we can go over it? Just give me an overview. I understand you have a busy schedule, but just give me half an hour so we can go over it. You can give me the pointers. If you want, send me a quick email so that I can read through some stuff so that I'm more ready when I come to talk to you, because I need to make sure I understand this, because this is a huge function of my role. And I want to make sure that I'm fully 100% contributing to the role. Take responsibility, take ownership, take the bull by the horns. And if you are doing that, people are going to have all kinds of things to say about you. You're bold, you're You're arrogant, you're aggressive, you're take charge, you think you're the boss, you think you know everything. I've been called all kinds of names. And when people say that to me, I just sit down and I look and I go, I've tried really hard to embrace most of those. I'm so glad that you've seen that I've embraced them. Is there anything else you think I should do? Just take the wind out of everybody's sails. And women, sometimes you can be polite, but be very cutting with your polite. You don't have to, don't raise your voice. Don't lose your temper. Please don't cry. Sometimes we want to cry. Go in the bathroom and do that. But just keep your composure and understand that you have your job because you are good at it. No, if you got the job because you bamboozled your way into the job without the skills that are necessary, that's a whole other conversation, right? This conversation that we're having is about people who have the skills, experience, and education to do the role. We've all met people who have gotten into jobs and we're like, who do you know?
Or somebody assigned them to do the job, but it's not a good fit.
Yeah.
I've known so many situations where fit has been like, oh, so and so,
Yeah.
where they didn't really think
Right. And
should
that's
be
not
done.
imposter syndrome. You are inept. So you are, and that's the thing, we need to stop confusing the terms. You don't have imposter syndrome. You are inept and inexperienced to meet the needs of the role. That's a whole different ball of wax, and I have had to let people go from jobs because I've hired people who have said to me, I have all of these skills. I've looked at the job description. I've had interviews and it looks like they know what they're doing. They get into the job and they're floundering. And at 90 days, I'm going to be like, this is not a good fit for you. You do not have the necessary skills to be able to do this role. And we should both just separate with the best of intentions and you go on your merry way and we go on ours. So I think that's what people like to conflate. People who are actually inept and inexperienced and making that be imposter syndrome. It's not. Imposter syndrome is fake. And people who don't know how to do the job, they just don't know how to do the job, male or female.
No, that's true. Because I always remember when I first took a leadership job, and I used to have people come to me all the time and say, if you don't do what I tell you to do, or and you don't do this or do that or whatever, I'm going to get you fired. And I always would tell people, I was like, I am on my God-given path. I believe 100% that we are here for a reason and here on my own journey. If you get me fired, I wasn't supposed to,
Yeah.
and I'm supposed to be somewhere else. But I'm here until I'm here, and then when I'm not here, I'm not here. So if you want all of a sudden or got whatever ability to get me fired, then there's another path for me, another door will open, and that's
Yeah.
where I need to be. If it's I said, but if you can't, then that means I need to be here. And I said that enough to several people where they just left me alone. I mean, but they tried you, right? And I was just like, and I believe that. I'm like, if somehow this job, they just called me tomorrow and said, oh, no, we don't think so. I inherently know that another door will open up,
Yeah.
and whatever path that I am on I will go into that
Yeah.
area, right? Now I might not have all of the 100% skills, but I will figure it out. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting that you say that because I was in the field of higher education like for years, right? That was my jam. That was where I was. The school I worked for was sold shortly thereafter. I could see the writing on the wall that I wasn't going to keep my job for very long. So I began looking around for other jobs. I spent 18 months in 3 different short-term contract positions and finally kind of settled on this job, which is not anything I anticipated doing, but I honestly believe that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where my path was supposed to lead me to. And every single experience I had before kind of led me to here. But to piggyback on your story, years ago, I was a vice president and I had the job. I was very green, very, very green. I knew I could do the job, but I knew I had a lot to learn. And so I was very, I was open to learning. Anybody who told me anything, I was going to take the advice. I was going to do what was needed to do because one, I was young. I was in my late 30s and I had this very big job. But I never doubted that I could do the job. I just knew that there were pieces of the job I had to learn, and I would do the job and learn it. A couple years into the job, when I felt, I've mastered about 85% of this, I am good. The person who had had the job prior to me came back to the company and was hired in a lower position, and she told everybody that she was going to get me kicked out of my job. Everybody, and so it got back to me, and I was like, okay. And so I decided, everybody's like, are you going to tell the chief operating officer and the president? No. They said, why? I said, what's that going to achieve? I said, she feels that she has the necessary chops to take my job. I just need to prove her wrong. That's it. And that's what I went about doing over the course of the next, 2 years that we worked together. She was proven wrong time and time again because I know what I'm doing. I'm skilled at what I'm doing. And I didn't fake my degree. So I am, and those are the kinds of things that I think, we as women need to understand because because she's older than me. She'd done the job before. So by right, I should have been scared. I should have been like, oh my God, am I really supposed to be here? Because when I was hired, I was told, the gentleman that hired me, was very happy to hire me. And I think he was happy to hire me because I was young and came with new ideas and I wasn't part of the old ways of doing things. But she wasn't privy to why I was there. She also didn't know what all my skill sets were and what I brought to the table. So she just thought, she's part of the old guard. And so they would be happy to have her back. They weren't. So and to this and now it's interesting because the world of academia is very incestuous, and so to this day we still cross paths quite often, and she's still to this day asking me to be part of organizations and things that I'm in, and I always think it's very funny because I'm like, you're the woman that said you're going to get me fired, but now you want us to be bosom buddies. Interesting, very interesting. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but yes.
So that is it, lady. I like that. I know, and I guarantee you, we will have follow-up questions. People will ask lots of things. I'll have you back. Suzanne is a very busy woman, so whenever she has a little bit more time in her schedule, I will bring her back
I'm
to answer any questions that you might have.
to come back. I'm going to wrap this up with 3 quick statements so that we can, put this in a nice little bow. So you asked me about, about call to action. So I'm going to give everybody who's watching this three call to actions. The first one, imposter syndrome does not exist. It is a social construct that was created to box women into feeling inadequate and make them blame themselves for environments that were meant to exclude them. Second, the myth undermines the authority and autonomy of women by making them a problem rather than discussing cultural change. Third, women become empowered when they stop blaming themselves for system inequities and instead find ways to create their own bases of power. Women in society and workplaces are not imposters. We are evidence of progress, resilience, and leadership. We are evidence that while the system still works to diminish our contributions, in the words of a wonderful poet, still we rise.
We rise. Thank you for Maya for that poetry, and you have a wonderful day, Suzanne.
Same to you, and thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing everybody's questions. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.
All right. Stop it.
And
Should
that's
be
not
done.
imposter syndrome. You are inept. So you are, and that's the thing, we need to stop confusing the terms. You don't have imposter syndrome. You are inept and inexperienced to meet the needs of the role. That's a whole different ball of wax, and I have had to let people go from jobs because I've hired people who have said to me, I have all of these skills. I've looked at the job description. I've had interviews and it looks like they know what they're doing. They get into the job and they're floundering. And at 90 days, I'm going to be like, this is not a good fit for you. You do not have the necessary skills to be able to do this role. And we should both just separate with the best of intentions, and you go on your merry way and we go on ours. So I think that's what people like to conflate. People who are actually inept and inexperienced and making that be imposter syndrome. It's not.